I welcome everybody on this fourth session of We Connect talk, and we have Mr. Vivekanandan with us. We have already sent the illustrious detail about Vivekanandanji. I would request Tiwari Sahib to introduce him, and subsequently we'll start the session. Thank you, sir.
So, friends, I came across the name of Mr. Vivekanandan in a seminar which was organized by IRMA recently. And since he belonged to the first batch of IRMA, there was hardly any faculty or any participant who had taught him at that time. But everybody was very passionately talking about him, and he was being called as Kurian of fisheries sector. And when I heard him, his talk was very unassuming, frank, and passionately honest. After the seminar, I contacted him and requested that I'll contact him after a few days. And during that period, I looked into internet about him. And the internet is full of a lot of things on Mr. Vivekanandan, who has actually done very marvelous work. And the way he describes in a very unassuming manner, whatever he achieved. That's very, very impressive. I'm sure that all of us will not only enjoy his talk, but also learn about few practical tips from him, which will be useful for us. And with this, I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Vivekanandan. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Tiwari. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Actually, I was quite surprised when Mr. Tiwari, got in touch with me after the IRMA workshop, because I think I was quite critical of government in many of my presentations in the conference, and I was seeing him as a retired IAS officer, and I was sure that he would have taken offense. But somewhat interestingly, he has invited me to talk about my experiences, because this time I won't have much to say about the government anyway, because I'm going to focus more on some specific experiences I have had in developing marine fishing livelihoods. And I've been very fortunate in getting this rare opportunity of working with marine fishermen. In many ways, the marine fisheries sector and probably the fishing sector as a whole, there have not been too many rural development or management professionals who have gone into the sector, especially from the point of view of working with the community. So I had a very rare opportunity to do that right at the start of my career. And this provided me with a lot of, real satisfaction, a very rich experience. And that is why I have called my speech, actually, what was circulated to you, the title, Adventures, because it's been quite an adventure working with the fishermen and trying to find solutions for various problems that they face, and to a certain extent managing to solve a few of them. So let me move on the presentation that I have prepared. Basically, this is the rough outline of what I have today in mind. I have used the term economic collectives, so I'm going to make some general remarks on them. something about the whole experience of organizing economic collectives, my experience. Then I am going to spend a lot of time on my experience with the South Indian Federation of Fishermen Societies, where I spent 26 years. Then I had comparatively a brief experience of working with fishermen in Gujarat, Kutch district. And then I am currently busy organizing women fish vendors in select cities of India, coastal cities, and try to make a few concluding remarks based on that. I am using the term economic collective as it is a more generic and flexible term for the good old term of cooperative. In no way it is significantly different from cooperative, but the cooperative term could be limiting in some ways because in India it is often connected with registration under the Cooperative Act, particular legal framework. In India, we have a whole set of economic collectives ranging from SHGs and joint liability groups to huge cooperatives like Amul. So, in fact, many of them are unregistered, the SHGs in particular. Some of them are registered under various cooperative acts, Multi-State Cooperative Act, State Cooperative Acts, Mutually Aided Cooperative Societies Act, etc. Now you have the recent producer company, which is becoming a very popular format, both among civil society, which is promoting it, and the government, which is also now seeing a lot of advantage in promoting that. We even have economic collectives, large economic collectives, operating under Trust Act in India. Of course, our legal system allows for considerable amount of plurality. Finally, it's the taxman who decides whether you are taxed or not. It's got very little to do with your registration. So it depends on your activity, what sort of business you do, etc. And we have a problem that the Cooperative Act tends to be controlled by the state government and denies registration to all those who seek it. So, in fact, my whole SIPS experience is working as a charitable society rather than as a cooperative. A registration was denied to us in the state of Kerala, and therefore we had to stick to a Cooperative Societies Act. However, the concepts, principles, and values of all these economic collectives I talk about are mostly derived from that of the cooperative sector. And the various pronouncements of the International Cooperative Alliance, like the cooperative principles that they brought out more than a century back and have modified it from time to time, and the much more recent cooperative identity statements that they have brought out. Now, when we are talking of economic collectives, there are two dimensions to these all economic collectives. One, they are business organizations. Second, they are member owned and managed. These are the two important dimensions of economic collectives. And without successfully doing either of them, let us say one of the two, they are not successful, the organization is unsuccessful, it collapses. Or it becomes a namesake organization, masquerading as a cooperative or an economic collective. So we have in India, of course, fishermen cooperatives almost in every village of the coast, in all the 9 coastal states and 2 union territories, who have no business, but yet enjoy the cooperative registration, the prestige of a cooperative registration. They have no business, but they are considered cooperatives because they are promoted by government, which uses them to supply credit, not credit, but subsidies and some welfare programs. So both these dimensions are very crucial, and unless both these dimensions are synchronized, economic collectives fail miserably. And this is where a lot of the challenge lies. Now, a little bit about what I have done with the marine fishing community so that you can judge or appreciate what I have to share subsequently. I started working in a very small organization, but with a very impressive name, the South Indian Federation of Fishermen's Societies, SIFS. Way back in 1982, my very first job after Irma, and through placement, most interestingly. From 1982 to 2008, for about 26 years, I worked in SIFS. Most of it was involved in setting up new business activities for the Federation, because I joined the Federation, and for expanding membership, which means primary societies and district organizations, expanding the membership to many districts in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. From 2008 onwards, the last 12-13 years, I've been working in multiple locations with multiple activities, setting up a producer company for fishermen in Kutch, initiation of new economic collectives for women fish vendors in selected coastal cities, which is what I am currently working on. I have also worked with the Tamil Nadu government on an FAO project, UN project, developing models for collective action on fish resource management. Time will not be enough for me to enter that particular arena, but I must mention that over the years I have realized that totally different type of organizations are required for resource management rather than the normal cooperative format, because it has to bring in everybody into the fold, and also the government, including the government. So we are working out, trying out new organizational models which will suit fisheries management. I have also been working right throughout my career as a sideline, as a personal interest activity with rights-based collectives which are fighting to protect fisheries livelihoods, as well as the coast and its ecosystem. Some of them are trade unions, some of them are associations. So I have been informally working with them and providing support to them and giving them solidarity. So today I'm going to talk about the economic collective experience I have, which has been a roller coaster journey with many ups and downs. The work involved considerable trial and error to build sustainable business activities and viable community organizations. The many failures were frustrating, but the learning was valuable. You learn sometimes more from failures. And the few successes were very satisfying and often the source of successful collectives. Given the time limitations, I shall focus on select experiences of the work with SIFS in South India, Kutch in Gujarat, and currently the work with women fish vendors in Mumbai and Chennai. Now, moving on to SIFS experiences, this is just a quick list of the more important business activities I was involved in experimenting with. Fish marketing at the federation level, supply of fishing equipment to members, development of new boat models, and eventually a chain of boat building centers, establishing outboard motor service centers, and the supply of motors themselves over time, establishing a credit system through the district federations, which would then flow to the individual members. We also set up some ice plants and storage systems for fisheries. Now, I will start with the fish marketing experiences I had. Now, I must also mention, though I have listed about 6 activities, I may focus mostly on 3 or 4 of them only. Fish marketing experience itself is a diverse set of experiences I had. Fish marketing was the main interest of 10 village level organizations which came together to form CIFs. And as a background, I must mention that the 10 village cooperatives or societies that form CIFs in Trivandrum district were basically of small fishermen who were not using any motor, only a sailing vessels, 4 logs tied together, which are called katamaram. I will show you some picture of the katamaram later, but basically really small poor fishermen who land their catches on their beach right in front of their village. And they were being exploited by middlemen who controlled the beach auction. So 10 years prior or more than that, in 1970, in one of the villages, in a church project, some educated young people who volunteered to work in the project worked with the fishermen to set up a cooperative society, actually registered as a cooperative society in that particular village. And they came up with a particular model, which was basically to copy the existing trading activities. It is just that the auction, instead of being under the control of private middlemen, became something that the village cooperative controlled and linked it up to credit and savings, and ended up with a fairly successful village society which brought good prices to the fishing community and changed and brought and had a huge impact, particularly in that village. Subsequently, with some assistance from the same organizers, a network of societies grew over the 70s. So by around 1980, they had about 10 societies, and it was assumed and it was felt by them, possibly based on earlier experiences, that it would be much better that they had a federation which will then take the fish to distant markets and also maybe even export it, because something like 20-30% of the value of the catch that they caught was coming from export species. Even though they are small fishermen and they did not have some of the bigger nets, they were bringing high value species with good market value. So because of that, the idea of a marketing was very important. So they decided to form a federation with the biggest ambition being to actually export fish. And hearing about IRMA and the possibility that somebody may be willing to join, they had come for the recruitment, and my title originally was marketing manager. So basically the idea was that I would set up the marketing. So the first 3 years of my career was spent in a number of fish marketing trials and activities. We started a retail shop in Trivandrum, tried retailing. We got into contact with seafood exporters in Cochin and Koilon, where you had a very, very strong seafood export industry, all private sector, relatively, you can say family-owned companies, not big businesses, but still in the fishery sector, quite strong and large in relative terms. And we knew that we could not jump to, make a quantum jump and suddenly become an exporter. So we thought, let us first supply fish produced by our members from our cooperative to the companies in Cochin and Koilon. So we thought that as a first step towards export marketing. Dry fish also used to be an important commodity those days. Quite a lot of fish landed in large quantities, could not find a domestic market immediately and would be dried. Certain species, the preference was to dry them. So there was dry fish marketing we tried. Much later, I will explain, we did an experiment trying to make use of the what was a fair trade label. I think the fair trade labels came actually before the eco labels, which are now quite dominant, have become popular. Before that, the fair trade label came, and we tried our own hand at direct export. This is just to give you a glimpse of what a beach level auction would look like those days. Probably still does in most places. So a lot of people with fish to sell and women ready to buy fish. Huge baskets of sardines being picked up by traders for long distance travel. So all these various trials of the first few years, I will not go into details, but some of the details I will share as part of the learnings we had. Basically, the whole idea that I got in Anand and learning from Amul experience was that when small producers get together, the cooperatives provide, get economies of scale. So more people come together, you have a lot more of the produce, and you will be in a position to then start doing some wonders in the market, including the most ideal situation, which is to reach directly to the consumer, the way Amul does. You do procurement, you process, and then you find ways of reaching the consumer in through various channels. The entire chain being under the control of the producer is the ultimate dream of every cooperator who organizes economic collectives, that people should bypass all these trade chains and directly reach the consumer and be able to get a significant part of the consumer rupee. But I found the Trivandrum small scale fishery with which we were working, and to a certain extent, it has similarities with many parts of India. So it's not unique in that sense. We found that the so-called economies of scale actually became diseconomies of scale. There's no term like that, I suppose, but I've just coined it to sharply sort of focus on it. First thing I realized, milk versus fish. Milk is based entirely on the dairy cooperatives are based on rural surplus for urban consumption. But what I found in the Kerala context, the fisheries livelihood and fish marketing is based on coastal surplus for interior consumption. Quite a lot of the village, because Kerala, you have this rural urban continuum. You have a lot of people residing in the so-called rural areas who are not necessarily poor. The Gulf returnees end up in their own home village, putting up palatial buildings and ready to buy very expensive fish. So quite often, this Gulf return person sitting, just right opposite the fishing village would be able to give twice the price of fish which a secretariat staff in Trivandrum would be willing to pay. So the whole demand pattern was quite different. So it is not that the Trivandrum city or some big urban center is where all the fish goes, giving the cooperatives a relatively simpler system to organize the logistics. So what turned out to be an assumption that there will be economies of scale in aggregating the catches and taking to major urban centers for sale proved to be an illusion. We found that if we want to sell, we have to aggregate and then once again disaggregate. So it didn't make much economic sense. That was one of the big problems we faced for especially the domestic market sales, retailing. Second thing we found was it is easy to look at fish as one commodity. But unfortunately, fish is a basket of commodities. There are at least 20-30 very important commercial species in Trivandrum. And each had a different season of availability. The supply was different. And the demand pattern was also different. Where it was demanded was very different. Some went for export, some went for distant markets, and not the same distant markets. You had certain species of great preference in Tamil Nadu. Other species were better sold off in Kerala. and some probably went all the way to other cities like Bangalore and even Hyderabad. So this is the kind of situation we found that. So it is not a single commodity to organize. The supply demand curves are there different for each. And whatever processing could be done, there are those requirements also very different. So for instance, oil sardine is very oily. It's very difficult to preserve with conventional methodologies. So like that, we were not dealing with one commodity and we could specialize in that. It was a basket of commodities. Then we found high seasonality, a major problem. Inter-season, which means within, so for instance, you have within this year to next year. This year we had bumper landings of a particular species. The next year the same species would disappear. So you developed a good market for it. You will not be in a position to protect your market and continue to serve in the next year. And another major problem in the fisheries was we were working with small scale fishermen who lived in their own fishing villages. But starting from the early 70s, we have developed a huge mechanized sector which operates from some select fishing harbors. For instance, I mentioned Koilon and Cochin. They were the major harbors those times where you had mechanized trawlers who go to the sea and use large scale methodologies to catch large quantities of fish, mostly dispossessing the small fishermen. So these are permanent enemies at sea. And there is no way our cooperative could procure fish from mechanized boats, or that would serve our objective. Who had the bulk of the landing? So the economies of scale also got badly affected because the bulk of the catch is in selected centers where you have mechanized boats. So overall, we eventually found that it is much better that the local cooperatives continue to do the auction. And they also had another variation to the auction, which we supported and encouraged. Species going for export, they could pool together because that is not being purchased by a large number of fisherwomen or small traders. These are by company agents. So there may be 3, 4, 5 company agents at best turning up at the auction. So they do the sorting, pooling, and temporary storage, and then go for a bidding system, which is quite competitive, and we have found success in that. So overall, at the end of the first 3 years, we realized that fish marketing by the Federation is not going to be a success. And the very job for which I was selected actually was unsuccessful as marketing manager. So it is subsequently only through other new activities that we worked on and a wide range of activities that we found that the Federation made sense. There are opportunities that to help the village organizations through a Federation and also to make it sustainable. So I will not go much beyond that at this moment because there are some other points here which are maybe of interest to many people, but I don't know how deep to go into them in the marketing. Our only one experience in the export came when a fair trade organization from Europe approached us and said, you guys are struggling in competition with mechanized boats. So that is one unfair problem you have. You are being exploited and ripped off by trade and exporters and all that. And also, most of the fish flowing to Europe from India from mechanized boats, where the working condition on these boats and the labor situation was not considered that ideal. So the fair trade people agreed and said, we have launched a label. It's quite successful in many commodities and many products. We would like to support you for fishing. So we did that. We managed to send a couple of consignments abroad, but ran into just too many problems and said that this is not workable. For instance, first of all, there was a species mismatch. That what catch our people were catching in our part of the country, in India, of the world, and what they required. They asked for tuna. And our fishermen were not going for tuna fishing in any substantial manner at that point in time. So it didn't make much sense. But they gave us a set of species which we managed to procure, but they were not necessarily the most important species in terms of volume or value for our fishermen. For the trials, we did that. Then we ran into the problem that, language and paperwork for export is very tough. One consignment, which to go to Germany, had a stopover in Paris, and the airport authority wanted a set of papers all in French. Well, we had something prepared in English and German, and they destroyed the entire catch, saying that you can't leave it here, and they will not let it go. Just give you the kind of risk that we were not expecting. Subsequently, we did another trial with a much more preparation. We got into a tie-up with an existing seafood exporter, hired his processing plant, and started a supply of species to Europe. And the first consignment that we sent was affected by 9/11. The ships could not go to Europe. They were diverted to some other Asian countries, and we got only a pittance for what we had said. So we realized that this ambition to go for direct export at all is, very foolish. We are much better off ensuring greater competitiveness in the existing local trade, including the export trade. You need much, much larger quantities. You need to have a much greater coverage of the coast. Because today the fish flows nationally. If tuna is not available in Trivandrum, today it comes even from Calcutta. Because fishermen who, for some peculiar reason, Trivandrum population finds tuna a delicacy. But, local domestic consumers in most states of India would not consume tuna. So cheap tuna would come from Paradeep in Orissa, from etc. So this is the kind of this thing that we found that it is impossible. Anyway, a lot more problems in this, which I will, because I have other these things to cover. Then we started very early on supply of fishing nets, because some of the margins that the shops were taking at that point in time, private shops supplying nets, were very high. It was more like, the particular fish became available, and the fishermen, because it's all very seasonal activity, the fishermen suddenly there's a huge demand because the annual fluctuation in catch is also high. Very good landings of anchovy took place in 1982, and the fishermen struggled to get nets in time, and because of the shortage of the nets, the net prices even doubled. So they put pressure on us to say the federation should buy nets for us and supply at reasonable price. So we started. We worked on it. The fishing equipment business, I'm not talking about boats or motors, but I'm talking of the fishing equipment to catch the fish. So nets, you have hook and line. So hooks have to be coming from Singapore. There's a mustard hook, which is a global standard. Then you have nylon lines. Then you have ropes. You have sinkers. You have floats. And as far as nets are concerned, there are at least in every part of the coast, at least dozen different types of nets are used, dozen types of nets with different twine size and different mesh sizes. So each is a product in itself. And the hooks, for instance, there are at least 20 sizes of hooks that our fishermen were using. So as we got in, items and all became quite large. It was quite an interesting to learn about the whole system and look for the cheapest and the best quality and so on. Technically, it was very challenging and very interesting. With great difficulty and with a lot of interest, we set up this system. It worked for a while. 3 to 5 years, we managed to handle it. Members were also reasonably happy because we were able to ensure that, because the private trade is extremely competitive. And once somebody gives good competition with them, they also reduce prices. and they try to reduce even below you. So they start. So it helps for the fishermen, but then the cutthroat competition starts cutting into the organization's margins for multiple reasons, including the fact that you may be a small organization, but you are a registered organization belonging to the organized sector. And there is no way a membership-based organization, which is a bit public in its scope, can start fooling tax authorities, not give bills, and various other tricks of the trade. Nylon nets, for instance, what we found to our shock was they are sold on weight. So the trader has got tricks like sort of pumping water into the nylon using syringes to increase the weight before he sells it. So all these kind of tricks of the trade all created serious problems. So unless you are a manufacturer, unless you have some big technology edge, this is a trade where all and sundry are involved, and it is quite competitive. Earlier, we were not there to give competition, so the prices were high. Once we gave competition, so it was difficult to sustain, and over time, in fact, we had handed over, the SIFs got reorganized into a 3-tier organization 3 years after I joined, because we had two more districts joining us. And we felt that it will be difficult to run through a 2-tier structure. And this particular activity we had initiated in Trivandrum went to the new Trivandrum district organization. And they also found that it was tough going, and therefore they warmed it up without giving it sufficient trial, in my view. But they found it difficult. Then I will go to an activity which was much more successful, boat building. Let me see if I can show you the. This is the catamaran. 4 logs of wood tied together with a rope. So this was the typical fishing craft. In fact, with some variations, it was the typical craft till very recently, all the way from Koilon on the west coast up to Puri on the east coast. Various forms of catamarans were the most important fishing craft in India. Today, over time, they have substantially disappeared, and they have replaced by new boats with motors, etc. So the 1982, when I joined SIFs, was a kind of an inflection point in the fishery, a turning point. Struggling to get fish near to the shore as a result of competition with trawlers, the fishermen started going deeper. And their existing sailing vessels, it was not very easy to do. And this was also a time when the first opening of the Indian economy took place to a small extent in 1980, when Indira Gandhi came back to power after the emergency, after the Janta experiment. And she first introduced these REP licenses, replenishment licenses. So if you are an exporter, 10% of the value you can import. So seafood exporters, wondering what to do with the import license, some of them just sold them. They were tradable. Some of them, one or two of them started experimenting with importing outboard motors from Japan. And these proved to be very popular because the fishermen were trying to go deep with the catamaran. And the catamaran started using the motor. They fitted it's an outboard motor, which means you can fit it. You can dismantle. You just remove it. You just clamp it. You just take it out, take it to your home, and then when you go fishing, you can put it back on board. So it's not permanently fixed. So these motors, lightweight motors, and they also introduced new technology in the form of that it can operate on kerosene. Because in many Asian countries in the 1980s, at that point in time, 70s and 80s, kerosene was quite a cheap commodity. And a lot of the poor people were using kerosene. In India, we used to have kerosene for ration. Even today, we have to a limited extent. So the kerosene being available in both in open and black at reasonable rates, the fishermen took to these outboard motors and started using. But the catamaran was not so ideal for this particular craft The boat catamaran was probably 5,000 rupees. The motor was 10,000. Already a unbalanced investment. And more importantly, the boats, the catamaran will get thrown up when a big wave comes, or the motors, the propeller will come out of the water and get exposed. These were water-cooled engines, and they could not survive too long out of water, the propeller out of water. So anyway, so there was a major changes in technology, and we were also in a position to participate in the technology change. An NGO, in fact, a church NGO in Kanyakumari, neighboring Kanyakumari district, had worked with the Intermediate Technology Development Group in UK, and they had initiated development of marine plywood boats as alternatives to the catamaran. And these became very successful and very popular very quickly, because the fishermen were trying to find alternatives to the catamaran to put the small motor on. These people have developed the catamaran, the alternative more because they thought that the catamaran timber is not available anymore, and it is a high time to replace timber-based technology. But the reality was the fishermen are looking for motorized operations, so they took it. It required some changes to suit motorization, and became popular in Kanyakumari. And neighboring Trivandrum fishermen, who are from the same caste and religion, went to the Kanyakumari to buy. So SIFS was approached to take up this technology and develop it on the Kerala side, which we agreed, and we started working on this boat building way back in 1983 itself. And it was initially more like an R&D extension work and so on. So more grant based, was not considered a serious business venture, but substantial cost recovery we aimed at doing. That is how it started. But this technology became a big hit. By the end of 80s, we were already the leader in this field. We had a small chain of boat building centers in southern Kerala where most of the demand was concentrated. And we had already started expanding the market to North Kerala. For instance, this is one of the early boats that we made, marine plywood boat, which was substituting the catamaran. There were also dugout canoes north of Trivandrum in Koilon district, used by small-scale fishermen, for which timber was impossible to get, because you need a large log to dig it out. It is a single log boat, and large size timber was no more available in Kerala due to deforestation, even by 1980. So some of these dugout canoes, because they were not used with the motor, so they lasted longer, were 30 to 50 years old. So people were desperately looking for alternatives, and we were able to provide this plywood vallam, we call plywood canoe, as an alternative. So this was the thing that, so technology development, new boats, this thing became a big success. This is the Vizhinjam Fishing Harbour in Trivandrum, where hundreds of boats, this is a very old photo actually, many parts of the west coast of India, southwest coast of India, you will find today plywood boats, either made by SIFS itself or copied by various private small boat yards across the coast. So this was a fairly successful activity. Commercially, the problem was our competition was once again with small boat yards, which picked up the technology and started copying. Despite a lot of initial failures, they all finally managed to pick up. And once they did it, they became good competitors. So the margins are not very high in this business. So our main business at the moment is to achieve kind of break even on that, but use it to set quality standards. Introduce new models from time to time, because the fishing is changing all the time and the fishermen come to us with new requirements. And ensure that the private yards cannot profiteer by making big margins. we have probably about a dozen boat building centers. It has expanded even to Tamil Nadu today. The other activity that we made a sort of a roaring success eventually was outboard motors. These motors which are meant are largely imported from abroad. The local market in India is not large enough for domestic manufacture or manufacture by the foreign principals themselves in India. So they are completely dependent on, 100% dependent on imports. There are very few manufacturers and very few models that suit us. So that most of the 80s, we had problems with the private dealers or distributors of the outboard motors having their own policies which encourage high margins of spare parts, very poor service system. After sales was quite poor. Mushrooming of a lot of outboard motor service center where the skills were not very good, who had not been properly trained. So we tried to enter all this, but we could not find any of the manufacturer willing to treat us as a dealer. We also required an import license, and it would have been very difficult to get an import license at that time for us. And we were not able to, we applied, we were not able to get. So this was the pre-91 reforms. So that was the condition. But we invested heavily in mastering the technical aspects. We started our own service centers, started training mechanics as well as fishermen who are using the motors, and developed internal expertise on this motor and managed to get parts through parallel stream of imports from other countries, third countries. Because you could be found that Singapore, for instance, had a good market for outboard motors, and we could buy from a Singapore dealer without too much of a hassle. So various methods like that, we established ourselves in the field. For many years, we were reasonably successful doing this activity. So post 91, when the economy opened, we got the breakthrough. Outboard motor was put on open general license and anybody could apply. And by then, the Suzuki Motor Company was competing in Yamaha with Yamaha in India, which was the dominant brand for outboard motors. And they were on the lookout for good local partners. And finding our technical capacity, though not necessarily financial capacity, and the fact that we had strong member base, they made us a dealer. And that is the start of our outboard motor business, which is now thriving. We are now not merely a dealer for in South Kerala or Trivandrum. We are now the All India distributors. So SIPS is the All India distributors. And because the large scale of the business is in South Kerala and Southern Tamil Nadu, our SIPS base, rather than rest of India. So even Navy and Coast Guard and even tourism guys have to come to buy from SIPS if they want the product. So this is now the kind of a cash cow for the organization. Despite giving the outboard motors at reasonable prices with limited margin, this business is doing very well and is giving SIPS sufficient funds to sustain itself. So some of the other activities in SIPS were not all that successful. Some we still maintain, some are not very successful. Overall, there are many issues that we found while competing with existing actors in the market. Unless a cooperative has an edge in some way, either there should be an advantage in investment, like what Dr. Kurian was able to do in Operation Flood, when Amuls were replicated across the country. He had a huge, soft loan from the World Bank and a large grant, commodity grant from the European Union, which he could convert to cash. and he had the enough funds to invest. So you had the investment advantage, or you must have the technology advantage. Like what we had with outboard motors, it was our technique and boat building. We have a technology advantage. We were the first movers in that terrain, and we were also, and it is also not a kind of technology that attracts the big players. So we fitted in beautifully, because for the small players, this was out of reach. For big players, it is too small. So we found a niche or a sweet spot where we could operate from. Or you should have the some kind of a monopoly status. For instance, outboard motor importers in India enjoy a certain monopoly because Suzuki or Yamaha put somebody as an all India distributor, and each region they give you a dealership. So they do not encourage competition with their dealers. So you are fairly protected. So you get a supply chain monopoly in your particular part of the business you achieve. So this is a sort of a monopoly for the particular brand. So that is how we were able to manage and get into that. It was getting the breakthrough, of course, required the member base and a long investment in getting technical knowledge of the field. So we realized that the economies of scale argument, all that, while they are theoretically correct, each context is different. Each commodity is different. And we also, I would even learn quite early in my career from others abroad that fishing cooperatives worldwide make money selling inputs to their members rather than selling fish. This is something not unique just to our cooperatives here, but it's something that seems to be true of fishing cooperatives even worldwide. Just as dairying is probably the most successful sector for cooperatives also worldwide. So it was quite a fascinating work for me in CIFS. I'll quickly go through briefly a little bit touch, because I had mentioned Kutch, I had mentioned women fish vendors. I'll go no deep. They just got simple slides here. Kutch was a mind-blowing experience, if only because Kutch itself is unlike any other part of India. And Kutch fishing is even more unusual. So it is unlike the rest of India in terms of terrain, in terms of the settlement pattern, the community itself. It's an interesting community. They had been historically sailors who had moved to fishing only a couple of generations back. They are all Muslims. So a kind of and they are small scale fishermen who operate from their own, from the shores, beaches. There they have creeks. So from the creeks. Organization of fish production. They also live in large joint families, which is rare in fisheries in the rest of India. Then the organization of the fish production. It is entirely a family-based affair. This whole joint family goes lock, stock and barrel, resettles on the coast every year for 9 months. It goes close to the sea, sets up campsites, and works from there. Every particular family has its own tent, and the male members go to the sea, and female members stay on shore to dry the fish. And the kids all are there. So it's a complete combined production of the family. And the main product is dry fish, because Gujarat anyway is not a very good state for fresh fish consumption. So fish has to go to distant markets, and most of these low value species, the best way to process them is best way to stock them is to dry them, mostly sun dry them. And so they have a large number of drying yards. Right, everybody has their own small drying system, and it is therefore a very interesting thing. Then the marketing practices are very also stunning, because this is a product which can be stored for long. In our fish auctions in South India, every fisherman brings a lot of fish. His price can be different from that of the person who went before him, who sold the fish, and different from the fish, the price of the fish the next fisherman sells. Here, they have fish prices fixed for the whole year. So that was also amazing. And the market prospects, of course, you have to only find long distance market, very little local supply, local demand. Remoteness of the market centers resulted in low prices and bargaining. So the Kutch Navnirman Abhiyan, a conglomeration of 20 odd NGOs, invited us to work with them and help this community, which was undergoing great difficulties because at that time the Mundra port was being constructed. And these people were fighting them, and there was a serious threat to their livelihood. So the idea was, okay, let us find various other ways of strengthening their economic status. So we worked for about 3 to 4 years with the community, with the local NGOs, and helped set up a producer company. Probably one of the first producer companies for small-scale fishermen in India. Of course, as I said, producer company is nothing but a cooperative. We are also part of larger civil society networks where cooperative control by state governments is extremely resented and a major issue. So genuine autonomy of the cooperative without the governments imposing representatives on the board, etc., are possible only if you move to other legislation. And so we adopted the producer company label, and that has been quite okay. And we also did some innovations there. Of course, in terms of marketing strategy, we, at least as a starting point, we only imitated the private trade. We cut out the bulk purchaser in the district from at least our members who were agreeable, and we then also got into the business of getting bids from bigger traders from other markets, dry fish markets. Vijayawada is a major dry fish market. Surat and Verawal are important markets through which dry fish flows from Gujarat out to other parts of India, so merchants from there. In fact, a lot of the dry fish from Gujarat eventually ends up in the northeast. So these are long distance trade. So we used to try to get competitive bids for people from the dry fish trade nationally and fix annual prices which are better and give the fishermen a good deal, or the fisher folk a good deal. And it was reasonably successful, and the thing is working. There is still a lot of scope for value addition and improvement, which we had in mind, but there were many reasons, especially lack of further support that we support from financial support, that we exited Gujarat at that point in time with a little bit of worry whether this company will last. But I'm happy to say that 8-9 years down the line, it is still thriving, which means they are okay. Credit was a major problem because every season you have to provide a startup credit, start of season credit for setting up their campsite, for buying provisions, and that whole establishment of that family on the coast is a major operation. And you will be very interested to know, I could not find that picture at short notice. Most amazing symbol of Kutch fishermen for me is a donkey. Donkeys are used to cart fish from the boat to their center where they operate for sales, fish sales, and also for all other transport requirements of the family. So it's an amazing place. So they are still okay. And I think another important innovation that we did compared to what we were doing in the SIPS belt was that we found that the producer now is not a fisherman who goes to the sea and brings the fish. The final product involves fish catching and fish processing. So the family is the member, and one male member of the family, one adult male and one adult female, are automatically are members. of the producer company having equal shares. So there are a lot more of innovations, a lot more interesting things in Kutch, which I will stop for the time being. Women fish vendors are a very interesting lot. They sell fish in all the coastal cities of India. They are from the fishing community. So we have, therefore, they have been largely and completely ignored group. Serious problems in terms of working conditions, problems of competition with male vendors in some areas, unfair competition at times, and very little social security and services. So we are working now in Chennai, Mumbai, Nagapattinam, Trivandrum, some 3-4 locations, and we are working on 2 sets of agenda, which is important here to highlight, because economic collectives, while there is a lot of scope, which we are already working on, because that is where our expertise historically has been. My team that works with me in Fishmark, this whole work is being done through an NGO called Fishmark after I left SIFS in 2008. So the Fishmark team is also more experienced in livelihoods, economic activities, running economic activities. But we find that this livelihood will not survive unless there is advocacy and fight for rights. So both these areas we are trying to work closely with the unions and try to create a system where there is simultaneously action on improving the facilities in markets, which only the municipal corporations can do, and improving the social benefits to fish vendors, which only the government can do in a significant way, while we take care of the economic activities are largely self-help oriented. In fact, we have come up with the Mumbai fisherwomen have come up with a very unusual demand, something that the other places they did not. They want direct access to long distance fish. They are currently buying from wholesale markets in Mumbai and are finding that the male vendors who are male migrants from North India have their own techniques of outcompeting the women, and the prices are shooting up for them, procurement prices. So they say, we want now direct access to, we want to bypass the bulk wholesale market. Can you help us? So we are now working on a trial of bringing fish from other parts of Maharashtra and even Gujarat to see whether we can do a backward linkage for women fish vendors and improve their livelihood. So a lot of interesting activities, all in early stages, but this is a totally new sector requiring a fair amount of experimentation. So I'm going to stop with this, saying that we have a number of, I've had a lot of interesting experiences in terms of livelihood development at a sectoral level with groups like small scale fishermen, women fish vendors, etc., and trying to find solutions to their economic problems, and realized that a lot of it is long-term painstaking work. It's a brick by brick work. It is not something that you can build overnight, and therefore you have a large number of challenges in sustaining this activity, scaling it up. And there are many other policy issues which I will not have the time to touch at all, including government as competitor in Kerala, for instance, and fishery policies which are adverse to small scale fishermen. So if your own production base and livelihood base is eroded, what can a cooperative do? A cooperative thrives only if the members thrive. And if your members don't thrive, the cooperative also cannot thrive. So with that, I will stop. I have taken much more time than what I had promised the organizers. My apologies.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for a wonderful, interaction, talk, and this was certainly a completely unknown territory that you took us to. Unknown waters, I would say, instead of unknown territory. So one question, sir, or one query I have is, out of inquisitivity, there was a point which you have mentioned about something called Johnson fiasco, and you have not elaborated on it. So we would like to learn from that. What was that, if you
Yeah,
can?
yeah, I was not trying to hide the fiasco, but I thought there won't be time. Okay, I'll use this opportunity to explain. So the Yamaha had a monopoly, and we tried our best to say, we are a fisherman organization, please give us at least spare parts directly. They didn't give. We actually did a campaign against them in Europe and other places, but it was sort of fizzled out. Go through NGO supporters, so all nothing worked. And when we were in, then this Johnson is another brand of outboard motors, and they are a European manufacturer, and they also had operations from Hong Kong, and they started exploring the Indian market for their outboard motors. And they came up with a model which could be operated with kerosene, so which was a very important requirement to operate in India and also Southeast Asian markets. For different reasons or similar reasons, I suspect that kerosene as a cheap fuel existed in all these countries, and therefore fishermen would not be willing to use petrol. These outboard motors of the lower horsepower were mostly petrol. So diesel heavier types were available, but they are not really suitable for fishing. So these people came up with their own kerosene motors, and we helped them enter the market. And we were so thrilled because we could directly now import. So we did a trial consignment, started supplying. Unfortunately, the technology, even though these people are very good manufacturers, and they're Johnson, and they have another twin brand called Evinrude. Both are the same engines, but painted differently and sent through to and sold in different markets with different brands and through different channels. So very good motors, but this Kero conversion was a failure. And our SIF's office in Trivandrum, where we had our main outboard motors workshop, became what we can call the graveyard of Johnson engines in India. So we lost reputation, we lost money, and we had a serious problem with the fishermen who started returning motors. So I mean, yeah, that is the short story of the big problem.
Thank you, sir. With that, I open the floor to the audience if they wish to have any particular query. Sama Sahib, would you like to start, please?
Sir, it was, as Vikas has told, very unknown area for us. We work with tribals, very small holdings, and agriculture products. You have compared milk organization as Amul. I would only tell, which you must be also aware, that Mr. Kurian also tried to get into edible oil and miserably failed. Reasons are very, very well known, because that competition with those organizations or those people who are stronger, powerful, and can have their own say, would not allow cooperative to come up. Yes, fishing business is a fishy business, very difficult. And I think your achievements, whatever you have tried to, were worth experimenting and learning. One thing I am not able to fathom even today, why municipalities, especially in dominant areas, even panchayats, where fish is consumed on a large scale, are not able to develop fish markets. In even Philippines, even in small islands and all those countries, they call it wet market. It is hygienically wonderful, nice. Anybody can feel a good feeling that it is not fishy, and running water and all that, keeping it and all that. So I think there has to be a stress on developing wet markets, especially in that. And I think municipalities must do it, and we can certainly somebody can make pressure on that. Because that will give many advantages, not only hygienic selling, but even taking care of competition, then grading a particular fish available at particular way. I think that could be tried. Thank you. It was a very nice presentation and nice learnings. Thank you.
Anyone else who have the queries, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, till the, yeah, please.
Very good afternoon, sir. Surekha here. Sir, as everyone said that this is the completely unknown subject for us. So I just curious to know that is there any government policy or program to maintain the ecosystem? For an example, like in particular area, if there is a high demand of particular species, then how to what are the steps we can take to maintain the ecosystems? So is there any policy or program for that?
Yes, I think the ecosystem decline of catches, impacts on fishing, impacts on biodiversity. Overfishing in general is a chronic problem in India. We have a large number of policies and large number of regulations on paper, but reality is ours operates like an open access system. The marine fisheries is a large CPR, common property resource, and the resource boundaries are also very large. So it is very difficult sometimes to have a good management system. The oil sardine, which I mentioned, is probably India's largest landed fish, largest in volume. It is available from Ratnagiri in southern Maharashtra all the way down to Kanyakumari and then up the east coast up to Puri, Ganjam. So you see the resource boundaries are very large. So it is not that much easy, amenable to localized management. It requires larger level management, which requires a very good control on fleet, number of fishermen who are going in, how many nets are there, sizes of nets. For all that, there are varying regulations. But unfortunately, like tribes, the fishermen are seen as completely, and the fishing itself is seen as something totally outlandish, that mainstream society, which includes administration and politics, have very little clue how to manage fisheries. And all that they are doing is not really worsening the situation. So, for instance, they keep giving subsidies for diesel, subsidies for boats, when actually you should be stopping all these because there's just too many boats. If Gujarat fishermen, Veravel and Saurashtra fishermen are getting caught in Pakistan regularly, it's only because we have exceeded by a huge margin what should be the fleet size in Gujarat, what should be the fishing capacity in Gujarat. So you have large numbers of boats with very little fish to catch, and wherever possible they will go to catch. So yes, it is a complete mess in my opinion. Many of us are in different ways working on that, but very little success to show so far.
Thank you, sir.
Ashwin bhai? Ashwin bhai has joined us. Ashwin bhai, would you like to ask something particularly related to Kutch or Malay? You would like to talk about Kutch?
Yeah, good afternoon, Vikas. Yeah, in Kutch particular way, we have some work, particularly in the Abdasa block and there were what we call most of are the Pagadia fishermen. So they have not having a boat and they are going on their foot to catch the fish. And one the major center there is called the Jakhau Bandar. And I heard from some of the Pagadia fishermen that there is like the previous question, there is some restriction of using the different size of net. So that you could have a small fish or the fish babies don't come in cage, and they could have the regular what you call the fish cage maintained. But many of the fishermen are not maintaining that net size, and there might be the issue of fish cage. So might be some regulation must be imposed properly on the size of net, and then we could have the can tackle the issue of the fish cage and such other things.
Thank you, Malay bhai. Before I request Vivekanandan ji to respond on that, let me also ask the audience if there is any specific question. Atul bhai, if there is any point, in interest of time, so we can club the questions and Vivekanandan ji can take it together to answer that. Mani, Atul bhai, any point from your end? Or anybody else from the audience? We'll wait for 30 seconds and then possibly Vivekanandan ji can respond to this query.
So just to show others what Pagadia fishing looks like. People going with nets in the intertidal zone
Okay,
to fish.
okay. Fine, sir. I think you can take that question and, then we can take if there is any further question.
Actually, the problem of fisheries management is very complicated. At one level, yes, mesh sizes, small mesh sizes are bad. But on the other hand, equally important is scale of fishing. So you have large trawlers going around elsewhere. Say, let us say, Gulf of Kutch. Historically, there has been no mechanized fishing. The Jakhau is right at the edge of it, and but over time, I think some of the trawlers are coming in into the Gulf, so they have an impact. Then there are so many coastal developments, which include mangrove destruction, which are having an impact. So a lot of externalities in addition to the fishermen themselves, small fishermen themselves.
So what
So-
about petroleum byproducts or petroleum waste getting released in seawater? How is that, impacting?
Definitely petroleum pollution. Now, we don't have enough information because the other side of the Gulf of Kutch, which is the same sea, fishermen live on this side, but what happens on the Jamnagar side can also have its own impact. We have a lot of oil tankers coming into the Gulf. It is probably the largest center for many products going from India now. The Mundra port as well as the tankers coming to the other side of the Gulf. So the external impact can be quite high. So I wouldn't be too much worried about what the Pagadia fishermen are doing. They are not really capable of destroying the resource, even if they are at an individual level catching, using small mesh nets, catching some juvenile. Because in tropical fisheries, the reality is juveniles, because you see, the juveniles, because we have multi-species, we have peculiar things where the Western notions of sustainability are not applicable. Or not all, something like, 100 or 1,000 sardines are hatched. Only, not even 10% of them will anyway survive and become adults. So catching juveniles by small scale fishery is not really a major threat to the fisheries. Larger boats with very powerful engines and big nets, as well as various shore-based and other sources of pollution, destruction of habitat through various development projects, these are probably a much bigger threat to us. In fact, Pagadia fishermen have lost fishing area. The Tata Ultra Mega Power Plant, nobody even told them all these various environmental clearances we've given. Just for input output of water, this intertidal zone, which is completely underrated and not understood, whose importance in the ecosystem. You know, I think from off the Kandla coast, the intertidal zone can go be as wide as 12 kilometers. Amazing. And this is a very important area for the fish resources. It's a very rich area. So it is not understood. So the intertidal zone has been cut, that Pagadia fishermen cannot walk through their usual areas, and a huge area is gone for pumping in water and pumping out hot water. So like that, the intertidal zone and its degradation is another major threat for the Kutch ecosystem.
Sir, like you spoke about net and the fact that you got into selling of nets for 4-5 years, and when the rates were, when the costs came down because of competition, then, the private sector kind of was permitted. So you kind of operated more as a market balancer or as a market intervention, though it may not have been initial intent, but later on, till the time the rates are, kind of safe for the community, it was there. We are trying the same with the agricultural products, particularly perishable agricultural products like tomato, methi, where our teams who are into food processing would buy only if the market is crashing. So the idea is not to necessarily keep our production plant operational for the entire season, but suppose tomatoes, the farmer gets 10 rupees or 8 rupees a kg, then we will not buy for processing. We will buy only if the rate is at 3 rupees, 2 rupees, 5 rupees. And we have seen that if we intervene in the market and buy 2 or 3 tons in a day when the rate crashes, the next 2 days, the rate is back into the normal thing. So as a cooperative, we are learning from it that market intervention could give sustainable long-term benefits to the farmers instead of turning producers ourselves. Would you like to comment on that, sir?
See, this is since I have always been stuck in especially South India with the South Indian fisheries, where a producer collective is not having the economies of scale to go beyond the beach level auctions or pulling together and supplying. So first point of sale. So the SIFS model works on first controlling the first point of sale. And I suspect that in many commodities, especially with less, where the processing level requirement is low, the first point of sale is where the maximum exploitation takes place because of pre-harvest advances. He gets a pre-harvest advance, the farmer, and therefore he is forced to sell at a very low price. He is not able to hold on, and he can think. So many of the commodities, so in fish in South India, in the particular areas, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, where we worked, it was very clear that the best results and impact is if you control the first point. Going further up the chain, the results were not good, the risks were higher, and we could not sustain it. And we didn't find the returns or the benefits to the community also all that significant. That is why they were quite happy to move across. So that is one. So I would say it all depends on the context, the extent of competition, the level of processing possibilities, and many parameters like that. Now, coming to the very particular case you are talking about, the price stabilization through a cooperative mechanism, I would suspect, cannot be made into a successful, will not have a successful revenue model. For the farmers, it will be great. but the organization, whether it's their federation or whether it's an NGO or some other entity which does the price stabilization operation, it will not be easy to break even. That is why we have the state doing the procurement processes and doing all these minimum prices, etc. So it is possible if the organization has other means of survival. Maybe we are like, we get more money by selling outboard motors, and we can cross subsidize an occasional purchase of fish when it follows below a particular floor. Possibilities cannot be ruled out of that kind of a possibilities. But otherwise, price stabilization operation needs substantial funds and an ability to take a big hit when needed.
Sure,
Am I
sir.
wrong?
No, you are right, sir. The only thing is, in price stabilization, when we are buying the perishable product like tomatoes, we have backend processing system to process it, convert it into dry tomatoes, which increases the shelf life, increases the cost. So there is a value addition, and there is ready market available for that. So yes, you are right. The whole cycle could take 3 months. So for 3 months, our funds would get stuck till the time the money is back and we are able to recover the costs. But those 2 days or 3 days of internal price stabilization activities over a period in time ensure that the market and the farmers continue getting stable cash money on the first point of sale, as you mentioned. So that's how we are kind of trying to look at that, and would love to invite you to Baroda whenever possible,
Oh, sure.
so that you can look at it, guide us more, and take us forward on that. Ninad bhai, can I request you to?
No questions as such from my side, but I fully agree with you that very interesting learning session, and how there are opportunities as well as problems in each area, which are very peculiar to that, and it becomes a specialized line. Sir, our group also has had worked with the fair trade for a very long time.
Okay.
And especially we were working on cotton, supplying to some of the chains in Europe. And I know it's a very interesting exercise. If it works well, it really benefits the farmers because the corpus comes for the community good, and you can do a lot for the community. So I was very happy to note that you have tried to work with them. And as you rightly said, that other initiatives have now taken over, and possibly the fair trade has become slightly outdated concept. But coming back to what I said, it was a very interesting lecture to learn about various issues, and more importantly, how pragmatically you have gone about tackling them. And that's quite a learning for our team over here, that how various issues can be managed through commitment, dedication, and innovative ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ninad bhai. And on behalf of all our trustees, sir, and audience, Vivekanandanji, I would take this opportunity to thank you. Oh, you are visible only now, Ninad bhai.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. It's okay. So thank you so much, Vivekanandanji. It was certainly a pleasure, and I'm sure we will be able to kind of reach out to many more people who could not join today through by putting up this talk on our YouTube channel, and we will send you the links across. You may be also wanting to share the links with someone who missed it today. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vivekananji, so much. We look forward to interacting with you and learning more from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.